The following podcast is intended for people who are intent on growing their business. And welcome to Innovate Marketing, where we are bringing you interviews with the people who are making waves in the world of marketing, branding, and business growth. I'm your host, Sean P. Neal, and we are brought to you by mypodcast.media. If you're a brand and you're considering podcasting for your marketing and communications efforts, make sure you visit mypodcast.media. Now, we've got a great interview for you today, so without further ado, let's get into it. And thanks so much for joining me on this edition of Innovate Marketing. I'm telling you, today was a really interesting interview. It was really cool because I got to sit down with Faruk Heplevent, and he is just this creative force in the automotive marketing industry. He has worked for brands like Audi and BMW and Tesla and NIO and Chrysler and Lincoln, like all these major brands. And he is on the cutting edge of CGI technology. And so we're going to dive deep into what that looks like. But first, let's learn a little bit more about Faruk. In 1990, Faruk began assisting professional photographers, first with still life, and then advancing to advertising and car photography. By 1999, Faruk was working for major car brands, creating stunning visuals to capture the public's imagination. In 2007, he founded The Scope, an innovative company that uses cutting-edge CGI technology to create incredible images for vehicle launches and advertisements. Not only did he coin the term CG photography using computer software to take pictures, but his team recently published Scope City in 2022, a fully computer-generated city building tool intended to deliver top-notch work on time. How did you get interested in this space of CGI and kind of this whole world?
It's a great question. So essentially, I was not the person working with Photoshop. Honestly, I'm a really bad Photoshopper to this day. So it's a very rudimentary capability. My background is, I'm a trained photographer. I assisted for about 10 years, started in Germany, started with a still lifer, learned to craft a big 8x10 studio cameras. Moved to a photographer who was doing people and cars, which at that time, mid-90s, was very unusual. There were car photographers and people photographers. So he was the guy combining those. And he had a very rock and roll style, right? So he was shooting from the hip. He was a new kid on the block as far as car photography is concerned. So I was lucky enough to get an assistant job with him. So did that for 3 years, pretty intense, a lot of traveling. And after that, I went ahead and started my own company with a partner, with Alex Rank, who's still actually shooting very good, very successful photographer. And in 99, working as a team in photography, especially advertising photography, was a very uncommon concept, because when you think back to the time before digital photography, keep that in mind. So you're shooting on film, right. You're shooting on transparency. You need to expose as precise as a third of a stop, right? It's very, it was a very, very technical endeavor, getting the shot. And it was expensive, it was complex, and therefore the successful photographers of those days were, what you would probably call alpha animals these days, right? Very, strong characters, self-centered, pushy. You had to be, because, it's like, it is, I know there's kids out there who shoot film. They're like, oh, this is so cool. And there's a trend to that. But if you put that in a professional environment where you essentially send somebody out to location scouting, this person has to shoot on film, go to a 1 hour lab, FedEx the stuff in a few copies, send it to the agency, to the photographer, and to the client, so everybody can look at location pictures, right? And then decide where they shoot. And the shoot is in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. timelines were very different. So you look at a picture in 8 weeks, it's going to look different. The sun position is different. So I was capable of, reading sundials and all these things to calculate where the sun is going to be, what on the day you're going to so everything was complicated, right? So, but it, very, very strong base training, let's call it that, to work on a shot. And compared to what we're doing these days, you had to get the shot in camera. When I started, there wasn't actually Photoshop. Photoshop came 97, 98. There was silicon graphics and all these things, but extremely expensive. So, photographers were tasked to get the picture in camera. That was the job.
Right.
Very, very different starting point. At the same time, much less images, much less output, much less chat, all these things that are different today. And then as you said, Photoshop or retouching came in, and, the photographer I was working for back then, he was one of the first guys to use it extensively. And at that point we had, and that's interesting, but the same conversations that everybody is having today about AI. I mean, CGI, the conversations, is it CGI? Is it not CGI? It's almost over, right? It's, if you do a good job, people don't see it. And there's a very interesting guy on LinkedIn. I posted something the other day where he analyzes which shots are, people say they are without CGI, but there's obviously CGI in them. It's done so well that you don't pick up on it, right? So that is what we're trying to do. We try to be invisible, right?
Right. And it's truly difficult to tell the difference. And, just going over, I was telling you before we hit record here that on the Scopes website, you've got images there that if you didn't tell me in text that was a CGI background, I would never guess it. So I would love to kind of dive into this creative brain. I love the fact that you come from, the 90s and you've got that. You're kind of like me. From the audio world, I was around when it was reel to reel and everything was manual, and the cutting room floor was the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
So I could truly appreciate that. Talk about this creative process, because you come into these projects, and for someone like you working in the space of CGI, there seem to be very few boundaries. So what's that creative process look like when you come into a new project?
Well, there's very few boundaries, but then again, it is essentially, maybe it's a bit similar with the whole AI craze. It is the task of a creative, of an image or film maker, is editing, right? It is, you edit, you make decisions, you make creative decisions, and the tools that you're using, something to be considered, on a second thought. I personally like CGI for the reasons you mentioned. It gives me creative freedom. So this is one of the things that we say, it's like creative freedom, production control. In a professional environment, when you're working for advertising clients, marketing clients, obviously the production control is incredibly important because it's part of the thing that they're buying. But before CGI, the development of photography, how I experienced it was becoming more and more limiting. So might also be a German thing, I don't know, but it's like, you would go on set and the clients were so worried about the money that they're spending and the amount of output they're getting. They're trying to maximize it. The procurement people were powerful. So you essentially get an Excel list, a to-do list, a bucket list on location, and you need to capture these shots. Just bring them home. So in post-production, they can be, put together. It was a very uncreative process. I was, not satisfied with that. That was one of the reasons why I said, okay, well, there is a CGI thing. And it was very, it was fairly slow back then and not very performant. But it was clear at that point also looking at tech development in general, the technology was basically running towards us. I would have liked it to be faster, but it was clear it's going to get faster, it's going to get better, it's going to get easier. So when I switched from location photography to CGI, in the car market, because cars was my market, we found out pretty early that we're not going to compete with the big studios. They're like, big studios with 600, 800 people specialize in car data prep and, mass renderings and all these things.
Right.
Almost industrial approaches, which makes sense. And we said, there seems to be a creative niche not occupied, having, the photography background and having a creative approach to CGI. So what we always said is creativity leads technology. So we are creative first, and then we force technology to do what we, dream about. Instead of, oh, look, there's a new tool, we should use it. We don't do that. We're like, it's like there's a new tool, but we're looking for tools to solve problems, creative problems that we have, or creative challenges that we want to solve. And that has been, I think that's the biggest difference in scope and scope as a company, because all the team members have a creative background. They're architects, graphic designers, photographers, filmmakers. And then we say, oh, okay, you fit into the team. This is the technology. Figure it out, learn it. But they learn it, interestingly, the creative folks, they learn the technology quickly because they want to do something. And then we have, obviously tech support teams that build scripts and things that, make using tech easier. But tech doesn't drive our decisions.
Yeah. And I think that actually is maybe contradictory to what many people might think.
Probably. Yeah.
We're at that convergence of AI and CGI. I'm glad you brought up AI because it's really changing, obviously the way that we do production shoots. It's changing the scope of, what those can look like. Can you talk a little bit about that contrast from today to maybe 10 years ago and how CGI and AI are freeing up that landscape?
Yeah, so for us, AI has been on the radar since 2018. It was, they called it machine learning. Essentially, I think it's pretty much the same thing. And it was a very nerdy area, but we started using things to, machine learning algorithms to automate stuff or to help us creating procedural assets. So there is, us being a fairly small team, we're 10 people, in CG land, that's very, very small. We're always looking for tech to help us to do repetitive work, tedious work, or, variations. And then we can pick stuff. And AI is very good at that. It's, does UV maps. I don't know. UV maps are basically describing the surface of a three-dimensional object to apply textures to it. Every CG person hates doing UV maps. Most hated thing in CG, I would say.
That's interesting.
When the machine can do it, they're like, oh, wow, this is cool. Yeah, because you need to lay it out, make sure it doesn't break. And it's just not fun.
Sure.
And nobody says, oh, great UV map, It's like, I mean, somebody says that, but it's like, you're not getting awards for it. So, it's that type of work. But so, those things the machines do, then, the Scope City tool is not necessarily AI. It's more a procedural system that we have built. But we started, using AI for UV maps. We're using it to create variations of windows, things that machines do very well and very quickly. And we use AI for ideation. So you say, oh, give me 10 options for a, nice private home by a Scottish lake, right? So it's like, it helps to really communicate inside the team and also with external creative directors to say, oh, how does this feel? Does it feel good? And if they like it, then we can go in and build it to produce in it. So for those things, it's very helpful.
Yeah.
I love to use it for writing. I'm not a good writer, so it's, it just helps me not to write gibberish all the time.
Well, we find it very similar, in the podcasting space that these tools aren't going to replace the human factor, but the fact that we can expedite, this much of the process and pull it out 2 minutes later and have something to tangibly wrap our heads around, have a conversation about, saves hours, if not days sometimes.
Exactly that. And I think that is a great thing, honestly. I mean, are people going to lose jobs? It's hard, not with us, let's put it that way, but it's, I'm sure there will be things that are replaced by AI. But if you think about, I did not use copywriters before, so they didn't lose business with me. I just wrote shitty copy, if I can say that. So it's
absolutely.
So it just makes my life better, and it makes the reader's life better, right? And I write more. I just didn't write that much because I was like, oh no, it's going to take so long. And so, and I think AI does that for a lot of people, right? And it's, people create cool shots in Midjourney or wherever, and they have a nice picture for their blog. Nice, cool. Why not?
Exactly.
Makes the world more beautiful, hopefully.
Agreed. So let's turn our attention here to the marketers of brands, because from the agency side, you are able to produce some amazing work that, again, and not to be repetitive here, but that has really changed over the course of the past 10 years, even in how that work can be completed. Yeah. So how should marketers of brands be thinking about their production needs, and like what kind of things do you think they should know?
Well, I think, it's also outside of the car world. I mean, the car marketing people, everybody in cars is very, very, very familiar with technology, CGI, and designers are using AI. So it's very much ingrained in their workflows, I think. But it's for marketers that are not a car OEM, I would definitely encourage everybody to embrace 3D in combination with AI, maybe even, because creating assets, in vast amounts that you need, because your marketing is becoming more and more hyper personalized, and consumers are expecting it. I, as a consumer, expect it, right? I expect, if I've shown interest in, let's say in my case, some software, I expect them to stay on my radar until I'm ready to buy, so I don't forget them. Because with the input that we're getting every day and the brand names that these products have, it's I cannot remember all these things, right? But if I need let's say in my case, it would be, let's say, a character artist software, something that I rarely use, I would be interested, they need to stay on my radar for me to remember the name. And ideally, they stay on my radar with content that is interesting for me. So for the content, you need assets. And in the assets, you want to have your product, or you want to control the worlds that you're communicating. And CGI in any, it could be more, it could be different styles. It could be photorealistic like we do it. It could be more like, a sketch or, manga style. But once you have that, CGI gives you the opportunity to own this world and repeatedly use it and refresh it and do new things with it, right? And instantly, so you could react to things that are happening that are interesting for your audience. But stay true to the brand, and that is, I think, because every marketing book, I'm sure you have read many as well, the marketing book from 1911 says there is so much communication, people that don't have enough attention, right? Compared to today. But it's still, it's the same feeling. It's the same overload of information. So how do you, cut through the noise? I think human nature says repetition. You know it. If it's entertaining, if it's useful for you, you're going to listen or watch or interact with it. But if you can combine that with a brand presence and visual presence that is consistent, I think that is a very successful formula.
I think that the fact that you come from that photography background just keeps recurring in my mind that you've mentioned that. So, as you look back at some of the projects you've been involved in, is there one that really stands out where, you can stand back and just say that was the one that makes me the most proud, that I felt like I just really was able to pull that together, and there's never going to be another one like that?
Well, there is one that was the most interesting in my career so far, but before CGI. So maybe I'll tell the real shoot one and then
Sure.
CGI one. But so, back in the 2000s, there was a brand called Daimler Chrysler. I'm sure you remember, but some of the listeners might not. So, Mercedes-Benz, Daimler-Benz, and Chrysler were actually a company for a while, and then they split up again. And when they did that, the introductory campaign was designed by Springer and Jacobi in London, and they actually put together a shoot on the salt flats in Utah, the Bonneville salt flats, right? And they flew in all the vehicles from a Formula One car to a truck to the Bonneville salt flats. And Roland Emmerich, Independence Day Roland Emmerich, actually directed that commercial. And I think it's the only one he ever did.
Interesting.
And we were tasked with taking the photo of that. And the idea was that these vehicles form the symbol of endless on the salt flat. So we had to place like 45 cars with stunt drivers and be in a helicopter and shoot it from the helicopter on film. It was just, before 9/11. So essentially we got stranded in Frankfurt. So we couldn't go to the shoot, and we got on the first plane into the United States that could go back in, and we flew out to Phoenix and drove up to Utah to do that job. And it was a big job, complicated. I mean, the biggest job, biggest budget, huge thing. And, Roland Emmerich's people and agency and all these things. And in the context of 9/11, that was the most memorable project. And it was, obviously a very, well, in hindsight, interesting time to experience.
Absolutely.
But again, it's 20 years ago, so it's also kind of, makes me, places me in the old folks corner, but it's,
well, you and me both, my friend. So let's do this. Let's, if you don't mind, let's play, 20 years in the future then. And what would be different, whether it's, the budgetary, whether it's, bringing all of those cars to one central location, like what would you do differently with today's tools with CGI to recreate that same thing?
That's an interesting question. So today that project would be probably a couple of weeks of data prep, getting the cars, but the production itself, location creation and rendering, we would do it in a day or two.
Listen to that.
Well, be like, it's crazy. Yeah. You're right. It's a very interesting question. Yeah. Once I have, the location, my location guys will probably put together the location in 2 days max.
Wow.
And then, if we had the vehicles ready, we just place them. And within an hour, I have a picture I can share with the client. Say, you like this, you want it a bit higher, a bit lower, and produce film with it, essentially. I mean, we do much more film these days than photography. And in the film environment, obviously CGI is even more powerful because, you need less people. And it's the concept that describes it best is like the endless sunset. So if you need magic hour, right? So the minutes after the sun sets and you have the great sky, you just press pause and it's there for you all the time, right? And a real shoot, 30-minute window in the morning, right. 30-minute in the evening. That's it. Right. So, I mean, that luxury, being able to, a sunset is endless and I can look here and look there and send the client a reference and they can pick from that. That really makes it possible to deliver very high-end assets quickly, affordably. That is the biggest difference. But this is also the big creative freedom that I, as a creative, do experience. And again, I've been there, I've done that, so I'm not missing that, right? I understand the younger generation saying, oh, yeah, I want to travel as well. It's like, oh, yeah, but if traveling is your thing, go ahead and travel, Maybe it's a perk of the job, but that's not the only reason to do the job, that you get to travel on other people's budget,
Right. I think it's important for, that contrast, because what has really not caught up with technology is, our belief system that some of these things are out of reach, that only the big studios can do this. And what you're saying is that now with technology and a good team like you've got, it becomes more accessible for many, many more brands to invest in this kind of production.
Absolutely. And it is also, what digital photography did to photography, or iPhones to photography, people were like, oh, now everybody thinks they're a photographer. Well, everybody is a photographer and it's fine. It's like, I'm not worried about people being a photographer. It's like before it was more a protected craft, let's say, because it was complicated, but that is not necessarily, I don't think it's a good thing. And it's the same thing with CGI, it becoming easier. Obviously also for us as a studio, we have, we might have competition where a single freelancer can create fantastic stuff. But I'm saying I celebrate it. It's fine, because it's like, it's creatively, I want that to happen.
Yes.
And it's not because the technology enables people to do that. And also, who is to say that there is not a fantastic creative talent sitting today on an Indonesian island? I can pronounce a name, right? Or, yeah, you name it, in Siberia, in Nigeria, in Canada. Well, Canada has a big VFX community. I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but it's that's the thing. There is, if somebody is willing to really work on their craft, and that's the interesting thing. Even if technology enables you, you still have to learn. You need to edit. You need to decide what you want to do. And not just copy somebody. I mean, that Midjourney can do that. I don't need a person to do that, just copying. Right. But if you say, oh, look, it's like, you don't need tons of money. You don't need contacts. You don't need crazy, powerful computer. But if you have the imagination, you have the idea, and there is something you want to communicate, you can. And then you can take it to the internet, social media, and find your audience, find your people, find your tribe. I think that is fantastic.
I love it.
I love that.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up our time here together, I would love to get just your future forecast, and specifically think about the scope, where you're headed with the scope, and then also maybe just some thoughts about, the industry overall, CGI, what the next 5 years look like, and maybe how those things intermingle with the scope.
Well, I think for scope, we have a pretty, it's like everybody had with COVID, rough patches, and it's been complicated and things been up and down, but we feel very comfortable in a place where we move more and more towards being a location company. We will keep producing, but we had a lot of conversations with other studios over the last year after publishing Scope City. What I say, can we use that? Can you do that for us? And then, we learned, we have a lot of locations that we built for ourselves for the launch projects that other people can use. So we're trying to build a system where we can, license those and share those. Because the CGI industry as a whole is growing, it is said. Because, you have the spatial video, you have, everything is becoming, and it's becoming more normal to use CGI because more people can use it with less money, so to speak, easier to enter the market. But the overall market is going to become bigger, and that overall market, like it tends to happen, there's going to be more clear specializations. So our specialization, and this is something we enjoy, is creating locations, creating the cities, buildings, to be used for advertising and marketing projects. We continue doing film, but also staying true to what we are. We do cars, we do running footage, we will do TVC work when it's about the car. But once it moves into the VFX, Hollywood, all these things, we stay out of that. So we stay in our comfort zone, but extend on the location thing. And, obviously we will, like many other people, use AI as a tool to generate, those locations, build them, design them. And again, I think it's going to be, the latest report that I read is like 20% growth per year in the CGI market. It's about 3 billion. 2020 is going to 14 billion, it is said, which is a lot, I think, So that AI is not going to stop that, interestingly. I don't think so.
Well, I'll tell you what, whatever happens, I am excited to see how Scope continues, what you all do, the work that you do. Thank there you. Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I can tell you're at the very core of it, a true artist. You understand the craft, and I think that's just such a beautiful piece of this conversation. Faruk Heplevent, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
That does it for this edition of Innovate Marketing. Today's show was brought to you by mypodcast.media. Mypodcast.media produces amazing podcasts for brands just like yours.
Two and the lobster for duck.